So welcome back to another video here in Pennsylvania, and today we're in York County, kind of south central PA, along the banks of the Susquehanna River. And we have a little bit of a mystery here to solve today, at least try to, best we can. So I'm down here along what's called River Road, here like I said on the banks of Susquehanna River. And there's a monument down here that I was not aware of until recently. A viewer mentioned it to me in a comment. And I've been on this road before, but unfortunately I think I drove right past it. I was actually looking for something else further up the road. I may have seen it out of the corner of my eye, but since I was focused on other things, I drove right past it. And it's right up my alley, dealing with history in this area, and more specifically, Civil War history. So there is an unknown grave right down here along the road. Let's take a look at it quick. Yeah, so right down here along the river, got the grave here. CSA, that means Confederate States of America. So he was not a Union soldier. Unknown, June of 1863. This one was put here in 2013. There have been several others that were placed here in the past, but they've been swept away by the waters. They do have a U.S. badge for him here. I think in other pictures I've seen they've had other flags here as well, besides the American flag. Yeah, so in June of 1863, the body of a Confederate soldier washed up on shore here along the Susquehanna River. And we're just north, like I said, we're in York County, we're just north of Wrightsville along River Road, but south of what's called, I believe York Haven, just south of there. So he had to have fallen into the river or been shot further upstream. His body floated down this way. And because there were the currents and bends in the river, this is a good place for things to wash ashore, like bodies. So this is where he washed up. In June of 1863, if you're into Civil War history, that should ring a bell. I think it does say June on there. Once I can point the camera correctly. Anyway, that didn't work out so well. But this is where his body washed ashore. Of course, he's unknown. He was discovered by the locals, and this is where they buried him, right here. I believe the little stream over here is called Dugan Run. And if you know your history, that year should be familiar. In June, of course, this is the Gettysburg campaign. Of course, the Battle of Gettysburg itself was started on July 1st, lasted for several days. Of course, the Gettysburg campaign, started in June. Confederate soldiers first entered Pennsylvania, prior to the Battle of Gettysburg. So, back in June, I forget what the exact date was they first entered. June 18th, I think. There was a June 22nd that Gettysburg itself was actually captured by Confederate soldiers. So they were here for a while prior to the Battle of Gettysburg. So this is when he passed away, in June of 1863. So in this video, I do want to cover several things. I know this monument has caused controversy. I remember reading a number of articles, complaining that this is here, suggesting that maybe it shouldn't be here because it's a Confederate soldier and things like that. So I want to discuss that for just a little bit, because I do have some pretty strong feelings myself about that. And also, we'll discuss possibly who this person was. It says unknown on here, but I did come across one article from a local historian who did come pretty close in some ways to discovering who this soldier was. So I do believe that this marker should be here. It is a piece of history. And there are people who feel very differently because he fought for the other side, and therefore this should be removed and all memory of him should be erased from the area. I strongly disagree. This, whether he's friend or foe, this is a piece of history. And one of my favorite sayings that I've come across concerning stuff like this, I found at Gettysburg. If I can find that, I'll show that picture to you again. I took a picture of it, but it's basically the idea of that history isn't always pretty. History can be ugly sometimes, but it's history and it's important. And it helps us to prevent repeating mistakes of the past. Erasing history doesn't get rid of it. It's still there. I'm talking about erasing monuments and stuff like that. It's still there. All right. And for me, stuff like this is important for another reason, I feel, because, oh boy, when it comes to Civil War history in Pennsylvania, I think I've said this in other videos, the only thing people tend to think of is Gettysburg, Gettysburg, Gettysburg. But man, there's so much more that happened in this area that you don't hear about. And markers like this, this is not a busy road, but markers like this make you wonder if someone doesn't know more about the history of this area. They think, what, a Confederate soldier here in York County along the banks of the Susquehanna? What's what's going on? Because Gettysburg itself is quite a ways that way from here, but what people don't realize is that that Gettysburg campaign encompassed quite a bit of this whole area. All of York County was captured. They made it all the way down to Wrightsville. They're planning on crossing the Susquehanna River. You know, they were almost made it to Harrisburg as well. They had captured Carlisle, Mechanicsburg. They're just about 2 miles from the Susquehanna River up that way. So, I mean, they were all along this area. They were burning railroad bridges just up here. So this whole area was overrun by Southern soldiers. And to be honest, the history books don't really teach that. You know, I never learned that until I started researching Civil War history myself here back home. So I think it's important for monuments like this to be here. Because a monument like this is not glorifying or celebrating this soldier. It's just marking where he died. It's a piece of history. It's saying that here, in June of 1863, you know, Confederate soldier's body washed ashore, and this is where he was buried. And I believe markers like this can pique people's interest and curiosity to know more about the history of this area. Like I said, this is not celebrating or glorifying this person, his cause, and his beliefs. It's just marking history. So I think it's important for these things to be here. I could go on and on about that, but I don't see the point in getting rid of stuff like this. I think it should be here. And then just quickly, a little bit of history as to who this person could have been. It's marked unknown, and it's still unknown as to who he is. But there was one author, his name was Scott Mingus. I'll put his name down below. He was the only author I came across that actually tried to identify who this person was. There's quite a few articles out there about this, but they all just kind of say the same thing, you know, repeating that his body was washed ashore, this is where he was buried, and then they get into the whole controversy of whether this monument should be here or not. But Scott Mingus was the only person that kind of just dug into the history of who this person could have been. So like I mentioned previously, you know, up that way is the Harrisburg area. There was a segment of the Confederate Army that was up that way, like they were just within miles of Harrisburg itself. And then back behind, going this way, it takes you down to Wrightsville. And there's a bridge across Wrightsville, and the Confederate Army made it to the banks of the Susquehanna River down that way. There was also a bridge up this way towards Harrisburg. I believe it was called the Camelback Bridge, but the Confederate Army never made it to that bridge. Like I said, there are other elements of the Confederate Army all throughout this area. So Scott Mingus was trying to figure out who this person was. And the people that buried him here said he looked like he was part of the cavalry because of the way he was dressed and the boots and stuff he was wearing. And just up that way, I think it was the 17th Virginia Cavalry was ordered to this area, not right here, but a little further up the stream, to burn a number of railroad bridges, not going across the Susquehanna, but that were going over streams that are flowing into the Susquehanna. So there were Confederate cavalrymen in this area, and records show that there was even a skirmish with some of the locals and the local militia as they were burning those bridges down. And one account says that they even tried to cross the river up here a ways, but were confronted on the opposite bank by some locals and local militia pointing rifles at them, so he decided best not to cross. But Scott Mingus looked up the records, and it doesn't say anything about any soldiers missing from that cavalry unit. Because the question is, was this guy a deserter, someone who ran away from the army? Was he a scout or a spy or one of those things? But I know he also mentioned other accounts that also mentioned that one lone cavalryman was spotted either crossing on a horse or a boat trying to get across the river as well, and he was shot. So it seems likely that last story is who this guy may have been, but once again, the records don't indicate anyone missing from that unit, the 17th Virginia, I think it was. So, but once again, records aren't always right. You know, a lot of records from the Southern, you know, perspective of the war were destroyed during the war itself and not always kept as well. So it could be, maybe it just wasn't recorded. So maybe he was a deserter trying to get across the river, or maybe he was a scout or a spy, because they were looking for ways to cross the river here, like shallow places to ford the river. So maybe that's what he was doing. Who knows? But that's about as close as we can get as to who this fellow was. And just one last look. But you know, it is a beautiful resting spot, whether he was friend or foe. You know, to be honest, it doesn't really matter in some ways anymore. The war is over. You know, he's long gone. But as always, thanks for coming along with me on another little adventure Like I said, I never really knew about this marker until someone mentioned to me, but it's a cool little spot here along the river if you want to check it out yourself. As always, thanks for coming along, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one.